Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming and joining us on a Saturday. We are very pleased to see very engaged and active audience. My name is Misba Bhatti. I am the research analyst at Center for International and Regional Studies, CIRS, at Georgetown University in Qatar. And for this particular panel, we are going to shift our focus to, for the lack of better word, to the global south. This morning, we talked about the global implications the Russian invasion of Ukraine has had over multiple regions. And so we are going to shift our focus from the Western allies and Ukraine and Russia to the global south and talk about how this invasion has reshaped diplomatic, economic, and security landscape. We're also going to talk about how some of these countries are dealing with Russia, and if possible, what are some of the future implications. I am joined with excellent set of panelists, and I'm looking forward to chairing this panel and learning from them. I am going to introduce them very briefly. If you want to get their full bios, please scan the QR code on the program you've received. So in the order they're sitting, we have Nygmet Ibadildin, who is an assistant professor and chair of Department of International and Regional Studies at KMEP University in Almaty, Kazakhstan. Next, we have Jonathan Fulton, who is an associate professor of political science in the College of Humanities and Social Sciences at Zayed University in Abu Dhabi. Leonid Issaev is a professor at the Department for Politics and International Relations and vice chair for the Center for Stability and Risk Analysis at HSE University. Ariel Gonzalez Levaggi is an associate professor at the Department of Political Science and the director of the Center for International Studies at Pontifical Catholic University of Argentina, UCA. And last but not the least, Mandana Tishehyar is joining us from the University of Tehran. She teaches at the Department of Indian Studies. So thank you all for joining us today. As was the format of our opening panel, each panelist is going to speak for about 7 to 10 minutes. I have my own set of questions, but in the interest of time, if we don't have enough time for me to ask the questions, I'm going to turn it over to the audience to address the panelists. So we will begin with Dr. Ibadildin.
Very much. Thank you for invitation. It's great panels, great speeches. And your question is about Central.
So yes, could you talk about the implications of the war for Central Asian countries and how have they dealt with the Russian invasion and how they have dealt with the development of the geopolitical landscape?
Mm-hmm. When you say how they dealt with Russian invasion all the time, I mean, it's Russian invasion of Ukraine, yes, because Russia invaded to Georgia. When Russia invaded to Ukraine, it was really a shock for Central Asia. And if we are talking about global south, Central Asia is the south of Russia. And when it happens in February 24th, at least in Kazakhstan, reaction was immediate in terms of society reacted right away. And it was a special kind of gathering, meeting. And usually in authoritarian countries, meetings, at least in Kazakhstan, it's very rare case. But it was kind of permitted. And in Almaty, I remember in 7th of March, it was a meeting to support Ukraine in 2024. So it was kind of 10 days after the invasion, in a sense. And I remember I was over there. A lot of people came. I think no one expected that it will be so many people to support Ukraine. And it was in the park where all Soviet monuments are collected, because you know, yes, that this destruction of Lenin's monuments in Ukraine and kind of this Russian reaction to it. In Kazakhstan, they moved all the Soviet monuments to some special place, kind of with certain respect, but with kind of out of the public eye. And this meeting was taking place next to Lenin, all of these heroes of the Soviet Union. And I remember Lenin was in this Ukrainian colors. And it was also Ukrainians came over there in Almaty. Some Ukrainians came already from Ukraine. It was a lot of support. It was a lot of all of the shouting over there about this, this Russian ship when they were requesting these Ukrainian guys in Zmeiny, and their responses became legendary when they said them kind of F word in Russian, I would say. So it was social support later on materialized in some kind of all of this humanitarian aid, and people were collecting medicines, people were sending all these generators for electricity supply, some of these winter things. And it was sent by planes. Yes, if planes are sent, definitely there is some kind of money involved, some state support involved, and people where the social support over there was kind of immediate. And first expectation, everyone was talking about that Russia is so powerful, but Ukraine in these first weeks, like first 2-3 months, they started to defend so effectively that I think Kazakhstan also, not only on the society level, but on the level of the state, reacted in kind of special ways. You understand, yes, that Kazakhstan is in very ambiguous situation because we are in security organization with Russia, we are in economic union with Russia. And this level of Russification in Kazakhstan kind of pretty strong. 20% of population are ethnic Russians. People speak Russian language. And all of the things, suddenly we thought that Russia is some kind of familia and so on and so on. And suddenly Russia attacks Ukraine, and everyone understands that it is absolutely serious. It is like, and this war was going on almost online. Everyone saw all of these brutalities, what was going on. When this Bucha happened over there, massacre in Bucha, when it was so well documented, I think everyone was totally shocked. And now and it was famous kind of in June when President Tokayev, he met with Putin and he said that Kazakhstan will never recognize DNR, LNR, because it violates international law, it violates these principles of sovereignty, and it was live broadcasting, and it was considered a kind of strong statement. Other countries in Central Asia, like Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan is officially neutral, and over there it's kind of special position all the time. And I want just to say that level of dependency of all these countries is different from Russia. Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan are very dependent in terms of remittances and labor market for Russia. Yes, people from these countries, they work in Russia, and remittances, for example, in Tajikistan, it's 50% of GDP. In Kyrgyzstan, it is 30% of GDP. In absolute figures, it's billions of dollars, really. And for the small economies, it's very important. Kazakhstan is also quite dependent upon Russia in terms of transition of goods, both imported and exported, and our main pipeline is going on from like 70% of oil is going on from Western Kazakhstan to Novorossiysk. And this is also very important because shareholders in this pipeline is American, European companies, Kazakh government and Russian government, and this pipeline pays taxes to Russia as well. And it comes to Novorossiysk, which is in Black Sea. And Ukrainians attacked first Sevastopol, then Kerch, and Novorossiysk. I guess all this it's a next target. And all the time, this is a major concern. As soon as war started, I think one of the first statements was that Kazakhstan will look for alternative pipelines. And I mean, the best solution would be this Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan with connection with Azerbaijan and Turkey. So it was first move. Second, very important, this regional cooperation started to grow. And this growth of cooperation meant like several times it was declared that we have to have joint response to security challenges. We have to, before this cooperation on the regional level, even before declaration, Kazakhstan also member of the Shanghai Cooperation Agreement, where China is present, where Iran is present. And over there, President Xi Jinping, he made a speech when several times he said that we confirm our support for sovereignty and integrity of Central Asian states and Kazakhstan as well. It was also some kind of delegation of support in a sense. And afterwards, military training were conducted with Azerbaijan together, and then with Azerbaijan, Turkey, and other countries in 2024. I think it was already twice. But from other side, it was limited participation of Kazakhstan in the military training in CSTO as well. And all the time when it happens in like society, social media is outraged. Why we go over there? What is going on? And last, I guess, point I want to make, when Russia declared mobilization, Kazakhstan hosted Ukrainian refugees. They came to Kazakhstan, not so many of them. Ukrainian diaspora in Kazakhstan, functions openly in terms of again, accumulating certain donations. You can donate again in this fintech things to Ukrainian kind of support of Ukrainian, all of this for Ukrainian military. And I can say that starting from 2024, Ukraine a bit disappeared from Kazakh media, from these discussions as well, because I guess this routinization of war started. And this Israel-Palestine case was also over there. And really, I think people still donate money, people still send some, but it was also research already made that people report that those who collect these donations, that wave of donations subsided kind of substantially enough. Some of the universities, they provided also special scholarship for Ukrainian students. But last thing I wanted to say, when Russia declared mobilization, around 600,000 Russian defectors, they came to Kazakhstan, and then they left after 1 year, and we have right now from 80 to 160,000, it's a double figure, of Russian citizens in Kazakhstan who fled from the war. And I will stop now. My 10 minutes are gone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nygmet. In your comments, you mentioned China, which is the topic of our next speaker. So, Jonathan, could you outline for us China's involvement in this invasion? It has been very, very dynamic to study so far. It has both caution and cooperation, if I can say so. So so if you could just outline China's interest and its overall implications of Russia's invasion.
And I got like 10 minutes to talk about all this?
You know me, I'm going to give you 12 if need be.
It's interesting. I think it's also interesting that we're talking about this the same week that the BRICS summit was held in Kazan, Russia. I've been very much a BRICS skeptic over the years. At the previous panel, Professor Paul mentioned that he believes BRICS is very important, and I think, yeah, it's important. I just don't understand how important it is. When you see the countries that are part of BRICS, there's a big divergence in interest and orientation. There is a narrative of grievance that animates a lot of these countries, and I think that is important, that we have to listen to this. But I'm not sure there's a unity of voice of how they actually, what they want to achieve or how they want to achieve it. One thing that was interesting to me reading the joint declaration was you could see preferences for things, existing infrastructure. They said, we want to work within the UN, we want to use the IMF, we want to use the WTO and the WHO. A lot of the institutions that underpin this order that so many people seem intent on replacing seem to really underpin a lot of what they're trying to achieve. So, and I think that's a good starting point, because when we're thinking about China and Russia, or China in the Middle East, or China in the US, or whatever, the first thing we have to do is grapple with this idea of China in order. And it's not easy. I mean, I've been watching Chinese foreign policy since the 90s, and it's not been the easiest thing to trace. For a long time, say the start of the reform era in 1978 under Deng Xiaoping, until under kind of the first administration of Hu Jintao, there's a pretty consistent adherence to this, U.S.-led or Western-centered global order, because China, of course, benefited almost as much as anybody, right? China went from being a very isolated, underdeveloped country to a global economy, and China got a lot of benefits from this order. And you can see, even in how China engages in this region, there's still a lot of that kind of dynamic where China is primarily an economic actor. Its preference seems to be for stability in the Middle East because that's what achieves its ends. So you'd think in this case that China would be very much a status quo-oriented country, but then you see statements coming from Chinese leaders that seem quite subversive. We'll stand with Iran no matter what. That's a pretty big statement. So what is it you want here? Do you want the regional order to be maintained? Do you want an Iran-centered or Iran-preferenced order? It's hard to read. I think I said the first administration of Hu Jintao. I mean, typically until Xi Jinping, a Chinese president had 2 administrations, total of 10 years. Under Hu Jintao's second administration, you started to see divergence. And that took place around the time the global financial crisis happened. This was in the aftermath of the war in Iraq. There were a lot of big events that made it look like U.S. hegemony or U.S. primacy or U.S. leadership or whatever wasn't a safe bet anymore. And China started to articulate this idea that maybe we have an alternative solution. And you started to see in its foreign policy orientation an independence of action that wasn't consistent with adhering to this, global, Western global order or whatever. At the same time, it's very cautious. When the Belt and Road Initiative was announced in 2013, every Chinese leader, every Chinese official said this is meant to complement the existing order, not to replace it. We're trying to buttress this because it's important. And that started to change. I mean, I think under Xi Jinping, there was a sense that China should be seen as a more significant global actor. The Belt and Road Initiative, which is a very clunky name that a lot of people laughed at, like I said, was announced in 2013. By 2021, after we had been through Brexit, after we had been through the chaos of the Trump years, after we had been through COVID, in 21, China rolled out a new initiative, the Global Development Initiative. The global is interesting because what they're saying is we have a global solution. We have an idea about how global order, global governance should work, and it's not based on their preferences, it's based on our preferences. There was a lot of talk in 2020, 2021, if we all think back to those awful days of COVID, Western democracies didn't seem to have the answers to what a lot of the problems we were facing. And there's also this narrative that authoritarian governments look very resilient, that maybe a top-heavy government with a very strong response could actually solve these issues. And that was attractive for a lot of countries, certainly in this region. And you saw China and Russia start to kind of have this normative affinity or narrative affinity for we think we have a better response to how to do things. Also at this point, we had U.S. leadership saying we're not going to support NATO in the same way we have in the past. Less respect for alliances, alliance relationships. There was a sense that the West was fractured, that NATO wasn't really a serious institution anymore, and it really kind of played into this kind of China-Russia alternative. And I think that's an important point. That's when this global development initiative was introduced, shortly after we see the war in Ukraine start, the invasion of Ukraine rather. 2 months after, in April 22, the Global Security Initiative, and China's saying security is not the way the West describes it. Security is the absence of, security is based on development. Look at our experience. We were an underdeveloped country. We were at risk of aggressive neighbors. We focused on our internal development, and now we're super rich and everything's great. I would ask, if that's the answer, then why do you have to militarize or securitize Xinjiang so much? If all you have to do is give, economic solutions, the people would probably start pushing back against the state. But so anyway, just back to this idea of China and order, like what you start to see and why the BRICS is important is that there has been this idea that there is alternatives, that China has answers. From Deng Xiaoping until Hu Jintao, every time somebody would go to China and say, how can we address our development needs the way you have, the answer is always the same. We don't have the answer. There's no China model. You cross the river by feeling for stones, right? Just, you try stuff, and if it works, you continue doing it. If it doesn't work, try something else. And Chinese leaders would always say, we'll support you in doing this, but we're not going to tell you. There's no prescriptive approach like the Washington Consensus. That's not true anymore, right? Chinese leaders now will say, we have the model, we know how to do it, and follow these global initiatives. So what we're seeing is what looked like under the Belt and Road as kind of a modest skeleton of a shadow order is starting to look a little more robust. The problem is, I think China's kind of tethered itself to some countries that don't really support this agenda. Its relationship with Russia actually has become quite a burden. And June mentioned North Korea. To me, this is fascinating, right? When a country like North Korea becomes involved in Ukraine, this isn't just localized. This becomes a very serious problem for Beijing, because not long ago, there's this trilateral summit in Washington between Japan, South Korea, and the US, committing to cooperate much more densely on security issues in East Asia. And if these countries see North Korea getting involved in this war, then they see this as, okay, this war is actually into our neighborhood now. And you can see where China's relationship with countries like Russia is causing strategic problems for it closer to home in areas where it actually matters. I think Ukraine has been kind of a low-cost conflict for China, as geopolitically narcissistic as that sounds. Obviously, people in Ukraine, it's very important. But for China, it's far away, right? It's not like on their borders. It doesn't really affect them directly. So of course, like, support Russia, what does it matter, right? But when Putin goes to Pyongyang in the summer, and meets with Kim Jong-un, and Beijing's not invited, and then when he goes to Vietnam, and Beijing's not invited, and you see this kind of Russia inserting itself into new Asian security architecture, I think China starts to look at Russia and think, hey, we've been helping you out, and now you're kind of going around us on this, and now you're getting North Korea involved in a war that's going to directly affect us. So it does create some challenges, for sure. That said, coming back to the Middle East, like I said, China's preference is for stability, but Xi Jinping has met with President Pezeshkian the other day and made a lot of very serious statements in support of Iran, even though a lot of what Iran does in the Middle East undermines China's interests here. So there seems to be this tension between, economic China, global China, which is all about, building relationships and enhancing its presence through trade and investment in infrastructure, and then geopolitical Xi Jinping China. And I guess the last point I'd make, and this maybe is provocative, but I think it's worth keeping in mind, the PRC in general, and Xi Jinping in particular, are really bad at foreign policy. Foreign policy is how can we use relationships or events in the world to shore up our own domestic situation. And time and again, they've seemed to misplay all of it. You can see Chinese analysts, Chinese Russia experts saying in 2022, we have to separate ourselves from this. It's bad for us. Those people all have been retired or been silenced or whatever. And Xi Jinping keeps on meeting with Putin and keeps on talking about a friendship without limits. It doesn't support China's overall agenda, but it does seem to support this, I guess, regime stability approach that Xi Jinping is pursuing. So I'll stop here. Love to have lots of questions and discussions after. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I do have a follow-up question, but I'm keeping my questions for the very end. Yes, my whip is out. Next, we have Leonid. Leonid is going to talk about sub-Saharan African countries. And as His Excellency mentioned this morning, Africa has been impacted in terms of the food supply and global chains. So if you could just walk us through the reactions of those countries and what does the war mean for them?
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Misba. I know you will control the time very carefully, so I will try to speak briefly. And of course,
Developed a very bad reputation. I need to do something about this.
but it is a good
okay.
reputation, an excellent one. And thank you so much for Zahra and Georgetown University of Qatar and Gulf Research Center, which is it is a privilege for me to be with you again for a long time. Speaking about Africa, look, I think that the situation, if we are talking about the impact from the global south and from Africa, I would like also to start from the point about our Kazakh colleague called it routinization of the conflict. I used bureaucratization of the conflict, but it's mostly the same. And in terms of bureaucratization of this conflict, of course, the situation is much more comfortable for Russia right now than 3 years ago. And if we are talking about the cooperation between Russia and Africa, of course, it's extremely applicable for the African region, and for sure, Africa is most comfortable, I guess, region for Russia during this period. And there are some factors for this. First of all, Africa for a long time was the forgotten region. And Africa was on the last places on the global agenda for the decades. And of course, Russian government is using this issue now. So that's why they use the African agenda, they use the African problems, and they try to put it on the first place on the international agenda. We talked about the reconfiguration of the global order during the previous day and during the first panel today. And of course, the war between Russia and Ukraine is only one dimension of this global order reconfiguration. Of course, in the Middle East, we have another dimension. In Africa, we also have a lot of examples of this kind of reconfiguration. And what Russia tried to do, just to put the African conflicts and African problems on the first place in negotiations and in dealing with the African countries, and actually don't talk about the conflict with Ukraine. So, and actually it works in terms of negotiations with Africa, in terms of the positive impact from the African countries, because they like this approach. They like that Russia tried to put their problems on the first stage. So, and this is works. Another issue, actually, the Russian absence in Africa for the last 30 years. From the one hand, of course, this is a problem for Russia, but from the other hand, it's also an opportunity for Russia, which Russian government also tried to use in cooperation and negotiations with the African countries, because Of course, Africans have a lot of problems, and there is a kind of fatigue from the Western policy in Africa and even the Chinese policy in Africa. And of course, Russia is the new actor. Russia is a new actor in Africa, and there are a lot of expectations from the Russia in Africa. And this is also the challenges and opportunities for Russia. Mostly the challenges in the long-term perspective, but in short-term perspective and mid-term perspective, it's an opportunity for Moscow, and they try to use it as a new actor in the continent. And it's also applicable for Africa due to the balancing policy which African countries try to realize during the decades, and of course in their own interest to have more and more global powers in the continent. It's not about they like Russia or they don't like the West, etc., etc. No, it's about its national interests, and that's why they are more interested in if we have more and more global actors in Africa. So they have more opportunities for balancing. So that's why Russian presence in Africa perceived quite positively in this stage in sub-Saharan African countries. But also that's one of the most important issues here, that African countries do not want to be with somebody against anybody. So they do not want to be with Russia against the West, but they also don't want to be with the West against Russia. So that's the main approach of the African countries. So they would like to cooperate with the all parties at the same time. Also, quite important issue in terms of perception of Russia in Africa. Of course, this is historical background. It's still important and extremely important even for the younger generation of Africans. And the Soviet support and the discourse of the Soviet support, the discourse that Russia never colonized Africa, etc., it still play an important role in terms of characterizing the relations between Russia and Africa. And another story is a discourse which Russia used dealing with Africa. And this discourse is quite similar to the discourse of not all, but a lot of African countries. The discourse of stability, the discourse of security, which is much more applicable for a lot of African regimes than the discourse of elections, the discourse of democracy, etc., etc. So that's why, Russia on the same wave with most of African countries and regimes during the current situation. So that's why I think that the situation is quite favorable for Russia in Africa right now. But again, I think that, of course, in short-term perspective and in mid-term perspective, Russia will feel itself quite comfortable in terms of cooperation in Africa. And again, it will be most comfortable region for Russia during the nearest future. But in the long-term perspective, I have some doubts because all what I said, it's mostly about emotional perception, that mostly about emotions, the Soviet background, and all other things. That's about emotions. That's about positive sentiments, but it's not a real background. If we are talking about real background, so of course this is a long-term game. but the problem is I don't see anybody who can predict anything in a long-term perspective. Now what will happen with this world in a long-term perspective. So that's why I have some doubts about the long-term perspective of the Russian-African cooperation. But again, at the current stage, it seems like the situation is quite comfortable for the Russian government. Thank you so much, Misba. I hope I'm on time.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Ariel, who is going to, we're moving from one continent to the next, literally. So he is going to talk about South American states and their reaction towards this war.
Well, thank you for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to present the Latin American perspective on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Latin America as a whole is part of the global south, but at the same time is the periphery of the West due to historical and cultural background. But there is an issue that defines what we call the agency, the regional agency, and it's peace. Actually, the community of Latin American Caribbean states that are combined by 33 countries declare the region as a zone of peace. So this element, of course, defines the perspective of a region that the main constituents don't look the world or don't have a security perspective or a primary security perspective of global affairs. So in which most of the countries are more engaged in promoting economic development. So for sure, the war doesn't goes in benefits for the region, because in a more polarized, in a more conflictual world, in a world where the norms and rules about multilateralism are falling apart, there are like additional inconvenience, especially to limit external pressures, but also Latin America became part of a negative, became negative affectly by different channels of transmissions, especially, for example, on the prices of some commodities or some products that are necessary for the production, like fertilizers. Latin America has a position that mixed a normative condemnation of the Russian invasion, but at the same time a broader non-alignment. When I say non-alignment, is not supporting materially the Ukrainian side. And there are two variables that explain this. One is domestic politics, in which we are going through a period in which what we call the pine tide, center-left governments are in power in most of the countries, that they have a more reluctant position regarding the US global agenda. And the second variable is relatively connected with that, is the degree of alignment with the US position in the region. So it's clear that the US exerts some hegemony. There are a strong asymmetry, but still Latin American countries look their way not to follow the steps. So because Latin America has their own diplomatic tradition. And this is something that is sometimes misunderstood. And it seems that Latin America and the Caribbean is like supporting Russia. But there are some arguments that even if plays favorable to Russia, it's not because they are on the side with Russia, but because of former and historical diplomatic tradition. So I select like two ways on how Latin American countries react to this conflict. One is fence setting. There is a article very interesting written by Luis Scanoni about this. Latin America has kind of 4 no's to general conflict that applies also to the Russia. First, no to the violation of territorial integrity. So more than 90% of the Latin American and Caribbean countries condemn at the United Nations General Assembly different votings. They condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And repeatedly, and even in the United Nations Security Council, like the case of Mexico, like and the case of Brazil, but at least in the first voting. Second, no to unilateral sanctions. So no Latin American Caribbean country has adopted this position because Latin America as a whole thinks that the sanctions make suffering to the people and not to the state. So this is something that came from the late 19th century. The third one is no to transfer of weapons. And here we have 2 different interesting cases. One example was kind of an exception to this no, is Ecuador. That by some military Russian equipment in late 2000s, helicopters and some like portable weapons. Since last year, the U.S. asked for diplomatic and political channels to give the Russian material to the U.S. and then U.S. will send to Ukraine, or directly the U.S. will keep it. So every other country in Latin America say that have this equipment say no. For example, Brazil, Argentina, but Ecuador, that at that time had a turning in its domestic and foreign policy, more aligned with the U.S. Under the Lasso government, start this conversation, and the Russians say, okay, if you give that weapons to the U.S., you will be sanctioned. Yeah, we will block your bananas exports. And after the election of the new Ecuadorian president, Noboa, Ecuador moved forward. And not only gave Russian weapons, but also Chinese ones. And Russia blocked the import of banana. And well, it's something that really captured the attention in the region. The second example is Brazil. The U.S., Germany asked for some export of 155 millimeters exports that Brazil was producing, and Brazil said no because it didn't want to make more the conflict war. So this is something that is interesting about last developments in Latin America. And lastly, we have the no to military involvement without a United Nations Security Council resolution. And that's the case, for example, of Argentina. Argentina moved with the current President Milei towards a very supportive position towards Ukraine, and even not only participate in the Peace Formula Summit, but in Geneva, but also join the Ramstein Group 2-3 months ago. But it only joined the humanitarian track, not the military one. So that's something that shows how Latin Americans, even if they are not so supportive materially of Ukrainian, became involved. And we have 3 years that shows that not only a reactive position of Latin America, but a more proactive one, even if it's weak and not so strong. And we have humanitarian aid, especially during the first month of the conflict. In many countries like Brazil, Argentina, they send tons of food and other products, especially to those who were displaced within Ukraine and also in neighboring countries. Also supporting, like Mexico, or leading mediation efforts. We have the not so successful case of Brazil, that first it tried on their own under Lula's administration, and then with the latest joint Brazilian-Chinese mediation initiative. And finally, the multinational activism that it depends on the country. But for example, Argentina was very willing to organize a peace peace formula conference in Latin America, but at the moment it didn't have luck to bring other countries in. To finish, what's Latin America is this one? It's a Latin America that is very fragmented in the approaches, that generally has a more reactive approach than proactive, and is not a really player in terms of the agency. It's more than an spectator, but still has some issues that it should be interesting to take in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Ariel. Last but not least, we have Mandana, who is going to address the Black Sea and the new corridors this confrontation has opened.
Okay, thank you very much, Misba. Ladies and gentlemen, it's both an honor and a pleasure for me to participate in this high-esteemed conference, and I would like to appreciate the initiative of our colleagues in the Center for International and Regional Studies at the Georgetown University of Qatar and the Qatar University for its hospitality to gather us here from different countries to discuss about the Russo-Ukrainian crisis from different aspects. Actually, the world we inhabit is in a perpetual state of flux. The example is the events happened today morning. In our relatively brief lifetimes, we have witnessed a shift from a bipolar system characterized by the division of the world between two ideologies governing two superpowers to a unipolar world dominated by a singular hegemonic force and having a pyramidal structure. However, this configuration proved transient. And today we find ourselves in what some scholars classically define as a multipolar era marked by the ascent of new global powers, and conversely, another group of scholars perceive the modern era as transcending traditional polarizations, labeling it a post-polar world, signifying the conclusion of the era of poles and emphasizing the pivotal roles assumed by new regions, new networks, and new coalitions within the international system. Concurrently, the concept of region has undergone substantial changes. Since the 1960s, a region typically denoted a cluster of adjacent political entities sharing geographical proximity, possessing natural attributes, and exhibiting common historical and sometimes cultural, linguistic, ethnic, and religious ties. However, this definition has gradually evolved, particularly following the proliferation of information and communication technologies. Today, the notion of a region transcends mere geographical delineations. It has become more flexible, with political borders no longer serving as the sole determinants of regional boundaries. Furthermore, the underlying rationale for gathering countries and forming regions has become more relative and expansive in scope. In fact, the economic interests and security concerns of countries and their efforts to achieve economic development and to remove the restrictions defined by the hegemonic powers and the dominant economic discourses have caused the new common identities, especially among the newly emerging powers, and the foundation of the establishment of the new regions in the new frameworks in the international arena has been laid. In this light, one can discern how novel discourses within the international system engender fresh relationships among political entities and shape a new universe. In fact, a new trend has surfaced on the international stage in recent decades, characterized by its selective nature and encompassing diverse actors, including governments, nations, institutions, and individuals. Termed internationalization, this trend seeks to preserve the diversity of cultures and values governing human societies while fostering deeper intergovernmental ties to achieve enduring peace. The contemporary world, characterized by increasingly interconnected networks between countries, has provided a ground for regional powers to implement novel joint programs and showcase a variety of small and medium-scale initiatives. This holds particular significance for our regions, where the execution of transparent initiatives and the expansion of corridors have acquired remarkable importance. Particularly in our regions, the implementation of transport initiatives and the expansion of corridors have taken special importance. On the other hand, the present crisis in the relations between Russia and Ukraine has cast a shadow of insecurity over the northern part of the Black Sea region. In a similar vein, the events that have unfolded in recent years following 7 October 2023 and the war between Israel and the Palestinian, Lebanese, and other regional people have plunged the Eastern Mediterranean into instability. The same situation has propagated to neighboring regions, impacting the Red Sea as well. Consequently, devising new avenues for regional cooperation has turned into an absolute necessity. Upon examining the map of the Black Sea region, it becomes readily apparent that the southern shore forming the extensive Turkish coastline enjoys security and stability. This aspect paves the way for increased utilization of the port capacities within this zone. Given the proximity of Iran and Turkey, it's clear that the closest Black Sea port to Tabriz, the historical and northwestern industrial and commercial hub of Iran, is the port of Trabzon. The distance between this port and the Bazargan border is mere 580 kilometers, and it's anticipated that the development of the Tabriz-Trabzon corridor will unlock fresh capacities for collaboration amongst regional countries. The corridor will transcend merely serving as a link between the two neighboring countries. On the one hand, it has the potential to facilitate access to the Black Sea for Azerbaijan and Armenia situated in the South Caucasus region. On the other hand, it can establish a novel platform for cooperation between Iran and Turkey with Central Asian countries, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. This can also provide China with a fresh route to advance the land-based component of the Belt and Road Initiative. Furthermore, the connection between Tabriz and southern Iranian ports like Bandar Abbas will establish a passage between the Black Sea and the Persian Gulf through the shortest and most economical route. The establishment of a network of corridors in this area will undoubtedly contribute to the blossoming of economic and commercial exchanges in the region, bringing benefit to other Black Sea littoral states as well. This route will not only open up a new pathway for Russia to reach the open waters of Asia, but also provide Georgia and Eastern European countries with new opportunities to access the markets of West, South, and East Asia. From a historical perspective, our lands were home to the world's first major transport route, the Royal or Shahanshahi Highway, 2,500 years ago. Thanks to this path, our forefathers connected Susa near the Persian Gulf with Izmir in the Mediterranean Sea. In a similar vein, during Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, the port of Trabzon played a pivotal role in providing Iran with access to Europe. Therefore, it becomes evident that for decades, strategists and economists have been considering the route as an influential instrument for expanding regional ties. The formation of a joint group comprised of academics from the regional countries to conduct feasibility studies and design a roadmap for implementing this regional initiative will undoubtedly pave the way for strengthening peace and friendship amongst regional intellectuals and people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mandana. You've said so much that I want to unpack, particularly in terms of the trade middle corridors and relationship with Turkey and India. India is a player that we haven't spoken about and is very key, particularly in the light of BRICS and Narendra Modi's government being in power yet again. And what does that mean for relationship with Russia? But in interest of time, I'm not going to ask those questions. I'm going to hand it over to the audience. We are going to try and wrap this up by 1:45. So may I ask you keep your comments to questions, and please state your name and affiliation, and if possible, please try to identify the panelists you want to ask the questions to. I'm going to start with Hannah.
Thank you for the thought-provoking session, Dr. Hannah Shelest, Ukrainian Prism. I have two short questions. First to Jonathan. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the Chinese-Brazil peace initiative in terms of how sustainable can it be? And China is talking that it is 100 countries that joined it. However, we don't see who are these countries. We don't see others support it. So what is your opinion? And to Leonid, just a clarification question, because you said Russia was absent for 30 years from Africa. I'm not a specialist in Africa, but even I know about the regular Russia-Africa summits, about Wagner Group, about the helicopters there, about the grain trade and military trade. And we can continue, not speaking about Россотрудничество and plenty of other activities been happening there, and definitely South Africa and with all the military contracts. So the question is, what does it mean being absent in your understanding? Or what would be if it is present there? Military bases or what? I mean, just clarify what does mean absence.
I'll take one more question. The gentleman in the middle, please.
Thank you. My name is Nazar Hilal from Qatar University. My views or questions does not represent my affiliations to the institution. My question to Dr. Jonathan regarding to China. Do you think China is the main winner out of this conflict? Because in terms of that elevating the pressure from the United States of dealing with China as the main threat. My second question to Dr. Leonid regarding the Africa. Do you think that the general term of the development on what it comes to under it, sustainable development, social development, it becomes a collateral damage, especially for African countries? Second, do you agree with me that the position of African countries now re-emerged or renewed the non-alignment movement because of two reasons: the dysfunctionality of the United States Security Council, and second, the failure of the European Union as integrated bloc from preventing this conflict? Thank you.
That
For the question about the Brazil-Russia, Brazil-China, I'm going to defer to Ariel on this because in our comments before we started, it's clear he knows a lot more about it than me, so he's better positioned to answer it. I don't like the idea of somebody winning this. It's kind of a cynical word. Is China the winner? But I take your point. I think, like I was saying in my comments, I think this actually has put China in a bit of a strategically difficult corner to get out of. But I do think up until this point, it's been, I'm pretty sure Beijing's been pretty satisfied to have a lot of attention deflected elsewhere. We were talking yesterday about these events in a more broad way, and I looked at an event we held here last fall, looking at the invasion of Iraq, and 20 years later, and I was asked to speak about how China saw this, and as I was reading for that conference last year, I kept seeing all these statements from U.S. leaders, particularly George Bush and Al Gore when they were running in 2000. That election, both were saying that our focus of U.S. foreign policy in the first century the first decade of the 21st century is going to be meeting the China challenge, and that lasted a couple of months, right? If you remember the first foreign policy event for the George Bush administration, it was that spy plane that was shot down over Hainan Island, and it looked like China-U.S. was going to be everything, and then of course September 11th happened, and China very happily supported the war on terror as long as the U.S. didn't look at China too much anymore. 2010, Obama said we're going to pivot to Asia. That didn't happen. I mean, so I think China's been very satisfied to see Russia take the brunt of the West's attention over the past few years. But I also think, like I said, their alignment, not alliance, but alignment with Russia on this has actually put them in a very difficult spot where, there will be repercussions that'll be hard. Everybody seemed to have this very, in my view, simplistic idea that China's watching to see how do we invade Taiwan after this, as if it's very easy to take Taiwan. Clearly it's not. I think, if anything, it's made the landscape a lot more difficult for China to achieve a lot of its foreign policy goals in Asia because, the bad guys are taking lessons, the good guys are taking lessons. My entire adult life has been about globalization. Everybody kind of let the geopolitical muscle get soft. I think the past few years, everybody's starting to think a lot more strategically, and I think it just makes things a lot more difficult for China to operate. So I'll stop there, thanks.
Yeah, about the Chinese-Brazilian initiative. First, it's difficult to see China as an honest broker. This is not the first initiative that China moved forward. Same with the Brazilian. China, more about this. It has been like exercising mediation role, especially in Middle East, like Iran and Saudi Arabia with the different Palestinian groups. But this is something different, and I think Brazilian joint steps of China after a failure that was very, very not the best experience for Brazil. That also don't have too much experience in mediation in comparison with China. I think that this proposal that we don't know the real details and who are behind that. It's part of showing some protagonism in trying to rally support for this global actorship, for example in the last BRICS meeting. But I don't think that is something that could be taken seriously, and I think that couldn't take it seriously, especially for the Ukrainian side.
Yep. Hanna, speaking about your question, yeah, I told about the last 30 years since the start of 90s till the end of 2010s. So actually, at that time, Russia did not have any relations, strong relations, in economic terms, in political terms, in military terms, with the African countries. All what you said about Wagner, about Russian-Africa Summit, it's mostly about the very end of 2010s. So Wagner came to Africa at the very end of 2010s. Actually, after the Vladimir Putin's announcement about the Russian-African Summit on the BRICS Summit in Johannesburg, 2017 or 18, don't remember the exact date. But yeah, and the first Russian-Africa Summit was organized 2019. And actually, we cannot see any real impact of that, the first Russia-African Summit, due to the pandemic, due to the many other reasons, and I just do not have a lot of time to speak about it. But even after the first Russian-Africa Summit 2019, Russia paid extremely low interest to the African countries. And if you look at the trade turnover with the sub-Saharan Africa, if you look at the official visits and many other things, and even the military cooperation, with some exception like Uganda and a few other countries, of course, Africa was not a priority. It was at the last places on the Russian foreign policy agenda. So the real changes in Russian approach we see during the last 3 years, actually. And what you said about the Africans try to re-emerge in non-aligned movement, you are absolutely correct. You are absolutely correct, and Russia tried to use this discourse in its own interest, and Africans tried to use Russia also and Africans also try to use Russia to provide this idea in the Security Council and other things. So, and of course, Russia is interested in this because due to this situation, Russia tried to replace the Ukrainian case from the international agenda and put the African cases on the top priority, Middle Eastern cases, African cases, and others. Thank you.
Thank you. Gentleman over there.
Hi. Hi, my name is Ahmed. I have 2 questions. One for Jonathan. I want to ask you about China's perspective. You said that China already has a security competition with Russia in some parts of Asia. And what do you think if NATO and the United States try to come up with some sort of a happy ending to the problem of Ukraine? Do you think that there is a prospect for an alliance between Russia and NATO to contain China? Do you think China would be looking against something like that? My next question is to you, to Leonid, the gentleman to your left. My question is, can African countries, we know that Africa is not a monolith, not a one thing. So do you think African countries can trust Russia? Russia is known to have different alliances. When you look at the different interests in Africa, Russia is with one group in one part, in the Sahel, with one group in the Horn, and Sub-Saharan Africa is a whole different matter. And when you talk about development, can we look at Russia as anything different from the colonial extractive nature of past countries? What do you mean by development? Thank you very much.
Try and take question from that side. Anyone? No? Okay. Magda.
Thank you. Thank you for these incredibly interesting presentations. My name is Magda Rostron. I'm an English professor at Georgetown, but my interest in the matters discussed is very personal, not institutional, because I come from Poland and I live here. So it's an interesting statement about Russia not colonizing Africa, presumably because it was more preoccupied invading, partitioning, and colonizing its neighbors. But my question is, to what extent can the current political considerations of the countries of Africa or Latin America be understood as a continuation of Soviet engagements in those areas? Thank you.
China and Africa seems to be the hot topic right now. Oh, you want to collect more? Khalid.
Khalid Al Yusuf, Georgetown University, Qatar. I would say I'm only representing myself in this question. I wrote it down so I can be brief. So given the severe and human and economic cost of the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, and recognizing that the prolonged wars historically often conclude with negotiated settlements, why have Western nations prioritized military aid over intensified diplomatic efforts to achieve a peaceful resolution that addresses the security concerns of all parties involved, including those expressed by Russia, especially when underutilized of diplomatic channels, Russia's willingness to negotiate, historical precedent for diplomacy, especially like the Minsk Agreement, public support for diplomatic solution. I think if I take a quick vote here, who would prefer war over diplomatic resolution? Can we see a show of hands who would like
no,
a
we're not doing
diplomatic?
that. We're not.
Okay.
Let's not do this. Let's not.
All right, just checking. Okay, so so my question would be, given these factors, why isn't there a greater emphasis on diplomacy to resolve the conflict? Thank you.
Yes, to the entire panel? Yeah. Okay. Do you want to start, Nygmet, in that sense? Okay.
I think when people go for negotiations with Russia, Russia takes it as weakness and goes for consolidation. And I think it was a lot of efforts, diplomatic efforts in the beginning. Scholz, Macron, everyone, they were going on to Moscow, knocking to the doors. And it didn't work well until Russia is defeated in the battlefield or kind of deterred. Then negotiations will start, and Putin proves that he is rational enough in negotiations if he has really interest for him, like this guys who are professional killers. He exchanged for Russian opposition, which is also, and he kept them in prison. It is also kind of illustration of his mindset in a sense. He exchanged one Russian citizen for another Russian citizen, and he made his rational choices, so he is ready for negotiations in this type of conditions. And that's why I think when we talk about diplomacy, if it is personalist autocracy, going on, migrating to this totalitarian kind of state, we understand that it has to be negotiations only on the top. And again, totalitarian leaders, they usually respect force. And if diplomacy, Western leaders, I think their rationality over here can be that to weaken Russia, as I think Olga was mentioning, and maybe it's like assistance to Ukraine is much more important as an act of diplomacy. Yes, Russia started the war, and diplomatic relations against aggressor state should be defense. Yes, thank you very much. I hope I was diplomatic enough.
Yeah, I mean, ditto. You know, diplomacy didn't work before Putin started the war, and now it's not going the way he wanted, and now he wants diplomacy. It seems, you know, a little disingenuous framing of the point. As to the question about NATO and Russia balancing China and Asia, I don't see that ever. I do see NATO is thinking a lot more seriously about China. You could see, again, because of this war, again, to my point earlier about Xi Jinping not being great at foreign policy, Europe was China's biggest trading partner. And then Xi Jinping supports Russia in this war. And now Europe looks at China as an enabler and as a threat to their security. And now their biggest trading partner is now considered an aggressive agent against their interests. And you can see the NATO summit that's held in Washington this July, laser-like focus on China now, whereas before NATO didn't really talk about China that much. So I think China's alignment with Russia on this has really brought a lot of negative focus on China. That said, I don't think Russia's going to work with NATO on anything, let alone China. Russia needs China. So yeah, that's my answer to that.
Yes. Look, when you're talking about trust in foreign politics, I remember when Mr. Putin came to this region, to the Middle East, first time, I guess 2005, something like this. So he visited Israel. He met with Ariel Sharon, and he asked Ariel Sharon about advice. He said that I'm new guy here in this region. Can you give me a kind of advice? And Ariel Sharon answered, never trust anyone. So Russia, on political level, doesn't trust to Africans, and Africans don't trust to Russians on the political level. And not only to Russians, to Chinese, to Western, to the all other global actors, and to each other, even to each other. So that's about emotions, trust or not trust. So we are talking about the common interest of the regimes, and we are talking about the specific regimes in African countries. And we are talking about the current political moment, not about the trust. And speaking about the Prof, you are right regarding your parallels and colonizing issues. But Africans don't have, most of Africans don't have enough knowledge about Russia and what's going on post-Soviet space, and about Russian history, Russian Empire, etc., etc. So, they don't care about Siberia, post-Soviet space, and others. But what is important for them, that Russia never colonized Africa. That's important for them. But all other issues, Russian-China issues in this term, post-Soviet space, Siberia, etc., etc. For Africans, it doesn't mean anything. So that's the reality. Mostly due to the very low level of knowledge about Russia, even now.
Yes, very brief. Until the invasion, Russia has two lines of operating in Latin America. One through quite pragmatic approach, for example, with countries that didn't have the strong historical connection, like for example with Chile, with Argentina, with Mexico. But there was also another line that now is, I will say, the main the structure of allies that Russia has in Latin America. That's related to those who had a nostalgia connection or Soviet connection. That includes Cuba, Nicaragua, and also lately Venezuela. We see very clearly after the deployment of a naval group sent by Russia to the Caribbean, that went to Cuban and Venezuelan ports. So that's an example. So what are the main partners of Russia in Latin America? One of the consequences of the invasion was basically that the relation with many of the countries has been shattered.
I'm going to pose a question, and then if you could give me your final comments on that. The panel also was trying to look at the future implications of this. So what would be the future consequences if this war draws out? We're already in the third year. What happens when we hit the fourth year, the fifth year? And is it going to be prolonged?
I think to make prognosis, it's not very grateful thing, I would say. But it looks like it's going to be attrition war, and Russia mobilized. Russian people now, before people were saying that it is Putin's war, now I think it's Russia's war. And more support in Russia is going on. But I think over there is some so-called this authoritarian fragility. Again, maybe it's too theoretical term, but Russia is vulnerable from inside, and it is a black box. No one knows. I mean, dictators, they are vulnerable because of their dictators, yes? Because they're aging, because there is biology, because institutions are weak. Prigozhin proved that something can happen. People say that Putin already kind of safeguarded himself from any type of this risk, but I think all the risks cannot be seen. And I think, unfortunately, Ukraine is suffering so much. And now the most important event is this US elections, what is going to happen afterwards. I think main idea that if war will end, it should end on the terms of Ukraine. And if they want to end it in kind of any time, if they want to have their own conditions, it has to be taken into account. In terms of Russia, that they try to expand and to solve their own internal issues through expansion, it is very dangerous for everyone and for international security and for Russia itself.
I agree, like political scientists are notoriously awful at predicting the future. I think the US election, of course, is the biggest variable we have to consider because that's going to shape a lot of responses. Looking at China, I mean, Xi Jinping made a statement at the summit this week. He gave one of his mathematical formulas, 3 no's. No spillovers on the from the battlefield, no escalation of fighting, and no adding oil to the fire by relevant parties. I mean, I think China's saying we don't want this to get any bigger than it already is. There's already too much stuff happening that we can't control. The landscape around China has gotten a lot tighter over the past couple of years. I mentioned the trilateral between Korea and Japan and the US. The Philippines has been really motivated to start working more closely with the US, a lot of Asian countries, the South China Sea, the Quad, you name it. So I think I think China's looking at the strategic landscape and thinking that it's in a lot of trouble, and it probably doesn't want to get in deeper with Ukraine.
Yeah, good question. But right now, as far as I understand, there are no any real reasons to expect dramatical changes in this conflict, to expect any dramatical changes inside Russia, in the West, and also less and less countries would like to contribute to this conflict and be involved to this conflict on any part. So that's why I predict the long-term conflict.
Well, I am those who are in the pessimist camp. I am not looking enough commitment from the West, especially facing next U.S. elections. Times, because of the amount of resources and men are on the Russian side in the long term. Yeah, I prefer not to do prognosis, so I can be very pessimistic about it.
Okay, I think we need to develop a new interregional order. BRICS and Shanghai Cooperation Organization are good examples of a post-polar order. They don't rely on geography, they don't rely on ideology, but they just follow the common interests of the member countries. We cannot define BRICS in a multipolar world, but it's a new order. And I think we have to define and run new initiatives between the regions in this part of the world. Thank you.
Note, I would like to thank all our panelists for their insightful remarks. And I would like to invite you all for lunch with a kind reminder that we will be ending the lunch at 2:30, so please be on time.